What if the kingdom of heaven was never a place, but a code? How many times have you heard that phrase, the kingdom of heaven? It sounds like a distant promise, a deferred reward, an unattainable paradise that will only be granted when everything here ends. But what if that idea is just a distraction? A carefully placed veil over our eyes, hiding something much closer and far more dangerous. We're not talking about dogmas, nor about religion. We're talking about an ancient mystery, a secret, whispered between the lines of sacred texts, buried in the subtext of human history, and silenced for centuries by fear and control. Because maybe this kingdom is within you, and someone or something doesn't want you to discover that. Now stop, take a deep breath, close your eyes for a brief moment and ask yourself, what if everything I've been told about reality is incomplete? That question might seem simple, but it carries the force of a rupture. It cracks open the first chink in the wall that holds up the world you live in. Imagine this, an ancient manuscript. In it, there are no maps or laws, but symbols, keys. One of these symbols appears repeatedly across cultures, a gate, a temple, a ladder. In many traditions, it represents the connection between two worlds, the visible and the invisible. But whenever it appears, it's tied to one idea, ascension, and that's where everything starts to shift. What if you knew that heaven isn't a destination but a state of consciousness, that it's within reach, not for those who die, but for those who awaken? Christ said the kingdom of heaven is within you, and yet most of us were taught to look for it outside. Why? This inversion is the first great illusion. Think about the parables, myths, and sacred stories. In nearly all of them, the hero sets out in search of something precious, only to discover that what they sought was always within them. This is no coincidence. It's a mirror, a reminder, but we forgot, or we were taught to forget. And who benefits from that? Let's go deeper. All ancient religions spoke of higher worlds. The Egyptians called it the Duat. The Hindus spoke of Locus. The Norse had Asgard. But none of these places were geographical. They were levels of perception, frequencies of existence, inner portals, and even more curious. All these traditions agreed on one point. Accessing these realms required inner preparation. There were no physical ladders. The path was symbolic. It was a journey within. So why was this turned into a promise for after death? Why did they take the map from your hands and place the key at the end of a life you don't even control? The answer might be uncomfortable. Look around you. A world of distractions, of fear, of comparison, of rushing. A world that constantly pushes us away from ourselves. Where meditating is a luxury, contemplating is a waste of time, and silencing yourself is almost a revolutionary act. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to just be still? The true kingdom begins there. The moment you quiet the world to hear yourself. But who would teach that in a system that profits from your disconnection? How many times have you distracted yourself from you today? The kingdom of heaven is a metaphor, and like all powerful metaphors, it's been hijacked, turned into literalism, rigidified, domesticated, because metaphors awaken, but dogmas put you to sleep. When you hear heaven, your brain thinks of something above, something unattainable. But when you feel heaven, truly it emerges as a state of lightness, clarity, a deep connection to something invisible yet present. You've felt it, maybe for a few seconds, maybe in a moment of ecstasy, pain, or silence. And in that instant, something in you knew that's where heaven is, and that's what they hid. Because if everyone knew this, the game would change. Awakened people are not manipulable. Conscious people don't blindly follow orders. Connected people don't live in fear. And a world like that would be dangerous for those who thrive on control. That's why the silence, that's why the mystery, that's why the metaphor was turned into a childish fable. But now that you've started to see, you can't unsee. Now, a direct question. For you on the other side, what if the kingdom of heaven isn't the end, but the beginning, the starting point for a new kind of perception? Are you ready to live like that? Because if you are, it's time to stop searching and start remembering. You've always known, you've always felt it. Something in you brought you here to this video. And that's no coincidence. It's an echo, an ancient call, a silent code waiting to be deciphered. Are you ready to crack? Before we go on, if this content is resonating with you so far, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. This journey is just beginning, and together we can go much deeper. Leave a like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. If the kingdom of heaven is within us, as Christ himself said, why do we obsessively search for it outside? Why do we kneel before temples and not before our own consciousness? Perhaps because we were taught to fear our own power. Yes, power. That's a dangerous word in a world that prefers obedient individuals. Access to the kingdom has always been tied to the expansion of consciousness, to the ability to see beyond the veil, to understand that the reality we see is just one layer, like the surface of an ocean, while the true depths remain hidden. And here begins the real transgression. The kingdom of heaven is a state of mind, a leap in perception, an activation. But an activation of what? Of something many have forgotten, something mystical traditions called the divine spark, the higher self, or the inner flame. A hidden intelligence within every human, suffocated by conditioning, fear, and haste. You feel it, don't you? That silent call, that restlessness that never goes away. It's your spark trying to emerge. But why was this silenced? Because people who access this state don't need intermediaries. They don't need temples, gurus, or rules imposed from the outside. They live by an inner truth. And that, for systems that feed on control, is a massive risk. Imagine billions of people awakening to their true potential. Imagine a world where decisions come not from fear, but from consciousness, where spirituality isn't hierarchy but presence. Can you see why that would be so dangerous? That's why, over centuries, the true teaching was camouflaged. Texts were reinterpreted, symbols rewritten, masters silenced. How many were burned, persecuted, or ridiculed for speaking the same truth? The kingdom was pushed to after death as a conditional reward. Obey now, and maybe you'll get something later. But the true master never promised heaven after death. He offered awakening now. Do you remember Jesus' words? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. But what truth is that? Not the external truth that changes with time and power. It's the inner truth, one that cannot be taught, but remembered. And here we dive even deeper, the forgotten memory of the soul. Ancient traditions say every human is born with a kind of spiritual amnesia, as if, upon incarnating in this plane, we forget who we are, where we came from, and what we're made of. Have you ever felt like you're here for something greater, but you don't know exactly what? Have you ever had the strange sense that reality isn't quite what it seems? That's not madness. It's memory trying to surface. Those feelings are fragments of the kingdom trying to manifest. But to access it, you must unlearn everything that's been imposed. You must peel away layer after layer of conditioning. You must die without dying. Does that scare you? It should. Because awakening is beautiful, but it's not comfortable. It demands courage. It confronts. It reveals. And here's the silenced truth. The kingdom of heaven is not a gift. It's an inner conquest. And it's not for the good. It's for the true, those who dare to face their own shadow, those who question reality, those who stop following and start feeling. That's why so many run away. That's why so many prefer the comfort of the known, even if it's a prison, because awakening means shattering, to then be reborn. But when that happens, everything changes. You start to notice hidden patterns. You begin to feel synchronicities. You start to see that life is constantly communicating with you. And in that moment, Heaven is no longer up there. It's here, in every gesture, in every silence, in every heartbeat. And then you understand. The kingdom of heaven is not a place. It's a gaze, a frequency, a consciousness. And that's exactly what they didn't want you to discover. Because now, you no longer depend, you no longer fear. You are the temple. You are the gate, you are the ladder. And the most unsettling thing for those who control is knowing that this truth cannot be destroyed. It can be forgotten, distorted, hidden, but never, ever erased. It lives in you, it is you. So I ask you, with all the seriousness and care this journey demands, are you willing to go all the way, to let go of false certainties, to walk inward, even if it leads through chaos before light? That choice is yours alone, but know this, once you cross that threshold, there's no turning back. Now, if this message is stirring something within you, if it's making your heart beat differently, share it with someone who needs to hear this. There are people right now waiting for this reminder. Be their portal. If the kingdom of heaven is within, then what exactly is outside? That's the question few dare to ask. We live surrounded by stimuli, distractions, external voices, doctrines. Everything pulls us outward. Everything trains us to seek answers in the external world. But what if the external world is just a reflection of our own unconsciousness? What if the true hell isn't a place of fire and pain, but a mental state trapped in fear, guilt, and the illusion of separation? Have you noticed how we've been taught to fear? Fear mistakes. Fear punishment. Fear God. But is God love or punishment? Doesn't that contradiction bother you? How can the God who dwells within you also be the one who threatens you? How can the Creator want your blind obedience instead of your conscious expansion? Think carefully. If the kingdom is within you, what else is in there? Just light or shadow too? Yes, the shadow. The thing most avoid at all costs. But true awakening requires facing your own darkness without fear. And here's the secret. Few understand. The kingdom of heaven can only be accessed by those brave enough to cross their inner hell. Hell in this case isn't a place. It's the sum of all the parts of you that you've rejected, the pains you hide, the wounds you ignore, the truths you refuse to feel. Jesus went to the desert. Buddha sat under the tree. Both faced their own demons, not as external creatures, but as inner projections. Are you willing to do the same? If we don't face our shadows, they will always rule us, unconsciously. That's the key the ancient masters knew. But that key was removed from texts, from sermons, from churches. They didn't want you to know that the kingdom is reached through the dark cave of the soul. But what's on the other side of that cave? There's absolute silence, a peace that depends on nothing, a presence that doesn't judge, doesn't fear, simply is. And it's in that space that you find the kingdom. Have you ever tasted that peace, even for a second? Maybe looking at the sky, maybe in a genuine embrace or in the gaze of a child. That second when everything stops, when time vanishes, when you desire nothing because you're already whole. That's the portal. But we live too distracted to notice. We live numbed by future promises and past traumas. We live outside the present moment, and that's exactly where the kingdom is. Do you see the invisible engineering behind it all? All along, the message was, look outside, believe others, obey, consume, comply, wait. While the true message was, be still, dive in, find, remember, be. And why was this hidden? Because an awakened human is no longer manipulable. They don't feel guilty. They don't feel inferior. They don't need to be saved because they recognize themselves as part of the divine. And that threatens everything, the social structure, the religious structure, the economic structure. Everything depends on you not knowing yourself. Everything depends on you believing you're incomplete. Everything depends on you forgetting the kingdom. But the good news is, you don't have to forget anymore. You can start now. No initiation, no master, No ritual is needed. Just stop and listen. Listen to what's within. Listen to what you've always known, but were afraid to feel. Listen to the silence that speaks louder than any speech. The voice of the kingdom doesn't shout. It whispers. It watches. It waits. Are you listening now? Because this moment, this exact instant, is the kingdom calling you back. When you realize the kingdom is within, that hell is psychological, that separation was an illusion perpetuated by fear and ignorance, something shifts profoundly. You see that the true battle was never against the world, against others, against sin. It was always a battle for the memory of the soul, remembering who you are. That's the invisible war we fight every day. And the curious thing is, the moment you remember, the war ends. The narrow path mentioned in ancient texts isn't a road outside you. It's the inner crossing, the silent, solitary decision to return home. And here's the point few talk about. The door to the kingdom of heaven was never locked. It was always open. What was closed was the eye that sees. Have you heard of the all-seeing eye? In Egyptian traditions, it was the eye of Horus, symbol of awakened consciousness. In Kabbalah, it's spiritual perception. In Christian Gnosticism, it's the inner eye, the vision of the soul. But we were taught to see only with physical eyes, to trust only what can be proven, to doubt what we feel. Why? Because seeing with the eyes of the soul makes you free, and inner freedom is the most dangerous asset for any system that craves control. That's why spirituality was replaced by dogmatic religion. That's why self-knowledge was swapped for guilt. That's why ancestral wisdom was replaced by rote formulas. But you can reclaim it all. You can reopen the inner eye. You can return to the source without intermediaries. You can recognize without fear. I am the kingdom. Yes, that statement might seem bold, but it doesn't come from the ego. It comes from the spirit that knows, in the deepest silence. I and the all are one. That's the heresy they tried to erase. That's the truth they silenced. That's the light. They hid under the veil, but now the veil has fallen, and you who've made it this far are no longer the same. Feel it. You're no longer searching, you're remembering, and that remembrance, however subtle, changes everything. Reality begins to bend before your consciousness. Synchronicities emerge. Answers come. The heart calms. You enter a state of grace, and you realize that heaven isn't a place. It's a frequency, a vibration you emanate, a field you access. Now think, if everyone awakened to this, what would happen to the world? Imagine a planet where every human recognizes themselves as a divine temple, where there's no need to control, punish, or compete, where compassion is natural, where truth isn't imposed but revealed from within. Utopia or a dormant prophecy. What if the return of Christ so many await isn't a man in the skies, but a consciousness rising within millions? What if the kingdom of heaven isn't the end of the story, but the start of a new era? The choice has always been yours, and the time is now. If this video touched your soul in some way, write the word awaken in the comments. Let's create a chain of consciousness that transcends language and connects awakened hearts around the world. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone you feel is ready to remember. Maybe you're the invitation someone needs to start this journey back to the kingdom. Are you ready for this journey? The kingdom has always been here. And now, so are you.